Hello everyone, and today is going to be a special little video. I'm making a little tournament here. Since this is going to be, the first ever tournament, which I might do more down the line if you guys like these. But first, I'm gonna go, over the rules first. Rule 1, verse equalization, everything is equalized. So, cursed energy, chakra, whatever it might be, it's all equalized. This also means that, there's nothing about characters not being able to see other characters for some odd reason, like cursed spirits or stands. They can see them, everything is equalized. Just telling you that beforehand. Rule 2, equal stats. Everyone, in the entire tournament will have just equal stats. This is to prevent pretty much anyone from just sweeping the entire tournament just because they're just fast and strong and all that. They have to use their skills to properly win the tournament. And lastly, there can only be one character from each verse, so we won't have multiple Dragon Ball characters or multiple JoJo characters. Only one character can show up in a tournament at a time. Now, to talk about generally what's going to be going on, each tournament is going to have a theme around them. This, of course, one being centered around fire, as you can see by the thumbnail and the picture right here. The characters will just be randomly selected by me, whether it be suggestions from you guys in the comments, whichever comments from whatever video, it doesn't matter. I will then select them if I think they look interesting for the tournament or fit the tournament theme at the time. I will then put them in a randomizer and bada bing bada bam, they'll show up in the tournament. Of course, some of them will also be just random characters that I think would be a good idea to just throw in there because, why not? Anyway, let's go look at that tournament bracket. Here are all the characters going from left down to right. We got, Potagas D Ace versus Benimaru. One Piece versus reincarnated as a slime. We got Heat Blast versus Zuko. I'll expand upon that later, but Heat Blast from Ben 10 versus Zuko from Avatar The Last Airbender. Magnus versus Natsu. Magnus from a certain magical index, and Natsu from, Fairy Tail. Rin Okimura from, Blue Exorcist versus Roy Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist. Genos from One Punch Man versus Meloleona, if I remember right, from Black Clover. Avdol versus Endeavor, Avdol from JoJo's, and Endeavor from My Hero. Escanor from Seven Deadly Sins versus Cho Jung In from Solo Leveling. And lastly, Jogo from Jujutsu Kaisen versus Shinra. Let's start with our first fight, which is Ace versus Benimaru. So that this video doesn't drag on for too long, I'm going to talk about those general abilities instead of talking about literally everything that they can do. First, Ace has a devil fruit. He's a devil fruit user, and it allows him to essentially produce, manipulate, and turn himself into fire. He becomes, well, it's because he ate the flame fruit, essentially. With this devil fruit, he can do many, fire type attacks, but those don't really, matter. They're just like techniques and stuff. But Ace also has Conqueror's Hockey, which allows him to basically just shoot out his willpower at people and can like knock out people who more or less like don't have Conqueror's Hockey, with some exceptions, I'm sure. With Benimaru, I'm gonna mainly try to stick to the anime when it comes to his abilities, so just telling you that beforehand. When we first see Benimaru in the anime, his first application of fire is through his ability that is Ogre Flame, which is essentially he does this little hand sign and shoots fire at you, and can even engulf you in said fire as well. And what it mainly does is that it converts your aura into the flames itself and then makes the pillar of flame around their opponent. Of course, he has access to other skills other than his fire skills, like Absolute End, which is essentially a skill that, or an art at least for him. It essentially allows them to, sever space, I guess, and is able to attack the target with both magical and physical phenomena. And it's even able to apparently harm true dragons like Veldora. Then there's another fire ability that he has, which is Hell Flare, which he essentially just makes a little dome and excites the particles inside said dome, where the enemies are, and essentially makes a big old dome of black fire and, all that. He even has techniques as well, where he can essentially coat his blade with black flames and essentially can slash you with them. Of course, it being called Black Flame Slash. He, of course, as seen from before, has black flames, which essentially turns his magicals, which is his mana, into essentially this heated flame. He apparently also has access to his own version of hockey, which essentially puts his spiritual pressure in the surroundings, which causes people to essentially freeze. That is, if they're weaker than them. The only way to essentially overpower it is either use your own version or just power through it with pure willpower. He has many other abilities like, magic barriers, thought acceleration, thought domination, and so on and so forth, but if I'm going to be honest, I think it's pretty clear cut who wins this based off of their abilities. Benimaru just has way too many abilities that not only can bypass his own, flame fruit, but it's just kind of too busted, even in the anime, if I'm gonna be honest. So I'll have to give the first fight to Benimaru. This next fight is going to be specifically between Heat Blast from Ben 10 versus Zuko from Avatar The Last Airbender. Quickly going over, Heat Blast. Yes, Heat Blast is going to be like Ben, but he's like lifeform locked as Heat Blast, just so you all know. But going on to his abilities, with Heat Blast, he can essentially create, manipulate, and even absorb fire in different ways by shooting giant fireballs, giant flames. He can even, essentially ignite the ground under him to fly around or just kind of shoot around like Iron Man or whatever. He has also been shown to essentially absorb fire, and I'm pretty sure even absorbed an entire house full of fire as well. His fire is actually he has so much control over this fire that he can even have the fire exude heat like a supernova. And with Zuko, he can essentially, manipulate fire. I'm pretty sure they can also produce it. Firebenders can, just produce fire. But that's not the only thing he can shoot out. He can also shoot out, technically, lightning. Of course, Zuko is also very good at swordsmanship and, hand-to-hand combat on top of his already existing firebending and, I guess, lightning bending. With just that alone, you'd normally think, oh wait, Zuko can manipulate fire and can even shoot out lightning, something that Heat Blast cannot absorb, so obviously he would win, right? Well, personally, I don't think so. Mainly because of just how much Heat Blast can output in terms of heat and fire. His normal flame, sure, would probably be pretty easily to manipulate to Zuko, but, as soon as Heat Blast starts taking it seriously and just throwing out, supernova level heat, he's not gonna do too well. And although his lightning is a good way that he can harm Heat Blast in general, I personally would just give this to Heat Blast, sadly. The next fight is going to be specifically between Magnus from a certain magical index versus Natsu from Fairy Tail. Starting off with Magnus, he can essentially, well, manipulate fire using magic, specifically with magical runes. The runes themselves are specifically on the cards, and sometimes he spreads them out throughout the area for one specific spell, which I'll talk about. He can even make and create illusions up to three or four, and can create them by bending light with his fire magic, which is interesting. He can see into people's minds with the smoke from his cigarettes or something, but he needs prep time, I'm pretty sure, to actually do it. He can also, of course, make a literal fire sword, which is just insane. And lastly, he can also make this giant fire monster that's essentially 3,000 degrees. Natsu is a dragon slayer, or a dragon slayer magic user. And specifically, what he's able to do with this is, well, he is able to essentially just throw out fire, whether it be out of his mouth, his hands, whatever. He's got many different attacks, like Fire Dragon's Roar, Fire Dragon's Claw, and basically all of them are Fire Dragon and whatever attack it's supposed to be. Alongside all of his, essential fire moves, he can go into essentially this state. It's like a Fire Dragon mode, essentially. Or to be more precise, Fire Dragon King mode. He also has another transformation that involves with combining lightning with his fire magic, and he calls it Lightning Fire Dragon mode or whatever. And in case he ever for some reason loses his, fire dragon magic or whatever, he can use lightning dragon mode and use the whole lightning stuff outside of its combination with his fire magic. He can even enter his most powerful state, which is Dragon Force, which is the most powerful state a dragon, slayer can, turn into. And of course, he can also turn himself into a dragon. Of course, semi turn into a dragon, as because of these antibodies or whatever in his body or something like that, he can't fully turn into a dragon. But he can do it at will, or at least I think. And I think I forgot to mention, alongside his Dragon Slayer magic or whatever, it allows him to just eat fire. So, yeah, kind of forgot to say that. But anyway, after, talking about all of that, who wins? Yeah, no, it's Natsu. And it's not even funny. I mean, he might be able to trip up Natsu with the whole illusion creation thing, but let's be honest, it's not going to trip him up for long, and Natsu has multitude of transformations that boost his stats, so yeah, it's Natsu. The next battle on the left is Rin Okimura from Blue Exorcist versus Roy Mustang from Full Metal Alchemist. Starting off with Rin, obviously, his powers directly come from his father. As seen with the blue flames, he is a Nephilim, and he can control the flames of Satan. Yes, his father is Satan, don't worry about it. The way he can use these flames is directly from his sword, which is his demon heart, essentially. It's where all of his power comes from. When he unsheathes it, he gets all of his power, and he can essentially manipulate these blue flames for many different attacks. With his sword, he can cause many different techniques, like a flaming slash attack, literal explosions, or even fire that can engulf an entire mountain. He also has technically enhanced strength, although that doesn't really matter in this case because of equal stats. But he also has incredible regeneration. Going on to Roy Mustang, he can essentially control, or he has alchemy, specifically flame alchemy, that he can essentially control the density in the air and make a spark with his gloves to essentially make either a giant explosion or a pinpoint flame, depending on how dense he wants the oxygen to be. Although he has normal alchemy, he doesn't really use it too much and prefers flame alchemy, but he has sometimes used it to make stone walls and the such. Now, between these two, it's pretty easy. It's Ren with his amazing regeneration and fire based abilities and just superior fire altogether, he's just gonna completely mollywop Roy despite his clear experience advantage. Like, if I'm gonna be completely honest. And Roy's, fire manipulation specifically comes from his gloves. So as soon as those are destroyed, he's basically useless. I mean, he has like weapons and stuff, but they won't really help him too much. So the winner is Rin Okimura. Next, we got Genos from One Punch Man versus Meloleona from Black Clover. I hope I'm saying that right. Starting off with Genos, he is of course a cyborg and he has many different cybernetic enhancements, especially over the series. His main way of fighting is essentially by shooting these high pressured flames out of his hands. He can use these on many parts of his body to essentially increase his speed, along with increased firepower. The way he's able to power these is through his core, which, if given the right circumstances, he can just make explode if he's in the wrong situation, I guess. He can also combine his arms together into one giant, I guess you can say, gun called the incineration cannons, which is just one big old laser of fire. I guess it's not a laser; it's just fire. He's also got good enhanced eyes that can essentially, track energy signatures and stuff. It can even track through like smoke screens and stuff, so that's nice. He also has this adhesive gel that can essentially make people, well, stuck. He got this after, to counter people who are faster than him. He can also, of course, disassemble his arms and stuff to like shoot them out for attacks, have arm blades, and of course the boosters, as I said before. He used to have a mode that lasts like 10 seconds that allowed him to essentially fight off against dragon level threats, but he has since gotten an upgrade where he can just do that naturally. So the 10-second thing isn't like a big deal, although that doesn't really matter with, again, equal stats. With Meroleona, someone needs to tell me how to say her name in the comments. She is a magic knight, and she's able to manipulate fire with her magic. She has fire magic essentially, and just like many fire users, she has a couple abilities with her fire magic, like she can engulf her fist with fire and just punch people with it. She also has an attack that essentially sucks in all the mana within the area and throws like a series of punches at an opponent that shoots out like blue fire and stuff that causes a lot of damage, but also causes damage to yourself. She has another one, and fairly similar one, where she essentially does the same thing as before, collecting all the mana from the area, but instead shoots out fiery blasts at her opponent, all around her opponent, in fact, so that they can't really escape. Then there's the full output of this, that being she essentially compresses flames within her or something along the lines of that, along with mana, and does a series of punches. This is her full power version of it. It's apparently, including all of the previous ones, called a mana zone. She even has an enhanced or powered up form that is called Hellfire Incarnate, where she just takes the fire from her grimoire or something like that and puts it inside her body to get enhanced. Essentially, it's like she becomes fire magic. It also increases her, just pure output in terms of attack potency, along with, it increasing over time. So she gets stronger over time on top of that. But of course, the drawback is that, well, she might just turn into mana and just, well, die. Now, who would win between these two? Although, because of her little transformation, or I guess you can call it a transformation, she does have better just output, but, Genos does have better mobility. But she does have an attack that kind of just counteracts that by just attacking him from every which way. So, personally, because she just has better skills altogether, I'm going to give this to Meroleona. This next fight is going to be between Mohammed Abdul from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure versus Endeavor from My Hero Academia. Talking about Abdal's abilities first, it's pretty simple actually. He has, well, a stand called Magician's Dread, which allows him to essentially shoot out and control fire, directly from the stand, of course. There's not much else to the stand. I mean, it's a bird like spirit type entity or whatever, and only the stand can be, well, essentially hurt by other stands, but the stand user, however, doesn't get that luxury. He also has this little fire totem thing. I forget what it exactly is called, but he can track people with it, essentially. There's not much else to really talk about with his abilities. It's just he can manipulate fire with his stand, and that's pretty much it. Now, going on to Endeavor, he essentially has the quirk called Hell Flame. It allows him to essentially produce flames from his body. He has many attacks like Hellfire Fist that he raises his temperature to, at least I think it's his max, and essentially just, you know, hits his enemy with that. It also apparently increases his speed, so that's nice. He has many ways to shoot fire at his target, like Jet Burn, which essentially just shoots, well, fire at his opponent. Hell Spider, which essentially creates like thin little, I guess you can call them wires of fire at people. He can also condense his flame into his fist and essentially reel it back and then just shoot it out as like a blanket over them. He can create a giant fire whirlwind, a fire arrow, and even his strongest attack, Prominence Burn, which shoots out a giant torrent of flame at max power. Now, who would win between these two? It's pretty obvious who would win. Even with stats equalized, it's not really a fair fight. Like, because of Avdol's intelligence, he might stay in the fight for a little bit longer than he normally would without it. But, you know, because of, equalized stats and verse equalization, all of that, Endeavor's going to be able to see his stand. So that's not something that you can just bring up into the equation. So sadly, he's just going to get completely outmaneuvered by Endeavor and then taken out pretty easily, in fact. So yeah, this fight goes to Endeavor. The next fight is going to be between Escanor from Seven Deadly Sins versus Cho Jung In from Solo Leveling. Starting with Escanor, Escanor has an ability called Sunshine. At the start of dawn, Escanor grows in power all the way up at noon, which is his peak. Escanor can shoot out essentially these balls of fire, or just essentially he's throwing a sun at you. And while Sunshine is active, he also gains incredible enhanced strength and other things as time moves on. So even with verse equalization, he does grow stronger as the fight goes on anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And at the peak of noon, as I said before, he enters essentially a state called the One, where he becomes like essentially pure power. Not literally, of course, but it's the peak of his power, and he is said to be pretty much almost invincible in this state. He has two main attacks in this state called Divine Sword Escanor and I think Divine Spear Escanor. Divine Sword is essentially he just moves his hand down, in like kind of like a slashing motion to, well, slash his opponent. And he does the same thing by taking two fingers and just, like a spear and stab someone with his, you know, with said fingers to hurt them. And even afternoon, just in case, the battle does go on for that long, he can use his life force to prolong the one, uh, because afternoon the one starts to fade and he starts to become weaker, but by using his life force he can prolong that, and it also makes him stronger. So yeah, although he does kind of die afterwards. Going on to Choi, or however you say his name, I'm not good with names. He, well, can manipulate fire magic, obviously, as a majority of these people in this tournament. He can use it to either shoot out a flame spear at his opponent, trap them in like a giant flame cage, or even shoot a giant flaming dragon at someone, which is interesting. Now, I would say this is a fair fight, but even with verse equalization and equal stats and all that, Escanor will just eventually be stronger than him and just has way better moves than him. Many of his attacks aren't really that big of a deal, even in comparison to everyone else in the tournament, sadly, which is kind of depressing, but yeah. Escanor pretty much wins this hands down. Now we are on to the final fight in round 1, and that is between Jogo from Jujutsu Kaisen versus Shinra Kusakabe from Fire Force. Now, I don't know if I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. No outside sources coming into these battles, so that means no Shinra Bancho Man, sadly. Of course, that also means that Jogo won't get any help, obviously, because this is a one-on-one. Speaking of, let's start with Jogo. Jogo in Jujutsu Kaisen is what we call a cursed spirit. He's essentially made up of this energy called cursed energy. He can manipulate this to his own will and kind of just regenerate, essentially. It's like what all cursed spirits can do. They can essentially do it without using reverse curse technique, which is a healing technique. Speaking of, cursed techniques, his cursed technique is called Disaster Flames, which allows him to essentially manipulate fire. With this ability, he can also just kind of manifest little lava spouts that can shoot compressed fire at people, and he can put it on any surface. So, yeah. He can also manifest the Shikigami called Ember Insects that he can throw at his opponents. Essentially, what they can do is that, well, once he throws them at his opponents, once they hit them, they explode. Or he can cause them to kind of be on a delay so that they essentially delay after they hit their opponent to, catch them off guard. With his technique, he can also just manipulate and produce lava and stuff, as we've seen in the anime. Can even use or manipulate and use lava constructs, which is interesting. And of course, there's his maximum technique, which is maximum meteor. Although the attack itself is really slow, it's very destructive, as well. It's a giant meteor. And lastly, before we go on to his last little thing, he also has domain amplification, which is essentially a barrier that also allows him to neutralize techniques and stuff, like Gojo's Limitless. And lastly, Jogo has his domain expansion called Coffin of the Iron Mountain, which essentially, with every domain expansion granted, gives him a sure hit effect, as in all of his attacks within the domain expansion will automatically hit his opponent regardless of anything else. Of course, as long as the other person doesn't have a way of canceling out his sure hit effect, that is. Going out to Shinra, Shinra can manipulate fire, again, just like literally everyone else, but he can specifically do it from his feet. A lot of other characters in the series call it the devil's footprint and other things, but yeah. With this ability to essentially shoot flames out of his feet, he mainly uses it for great mobility and just kind of flies all around the place and mainly uses, well, kicks and stuff while fighting. He doesn't usually use his arms that much. He also has access to these hand signs, which allow him to essentially do stuff like compress his flames so that he can even move faster and stuff like that. And basically, it gives him more control over his flames. He also has this, I guess what you can call a transformation, where he has access to 100% of his flame ability, called hysterical strength. He usually gets this while he's at basically death's door, and his flames gain a claw look. Of course, this does enhance all of his stats essentially. So it's essentially a transformation, but not literally. He's just unlocking more power, to be more precise. So who wins between these two? Well, especially with hysterical strength or whatever, along with the hand signs and all that, Shinra definitely probably, has increased stats to be able to take care of Jogo. But there is one thing that Shinra needs to worry about, and that has to do with Jogo's domain expansion. As soon as, he's flying around or whatever, and Jogo's having a hard time hitting him because of his just way better mobility. He's most likely just gonna hit a domain expansion, and after that, Shinra literally has no way of actually defeating Jogo. Maybe if he's fast enough, he might be able to take out Jogo before the domain expansion hits on him, but that's highly unlikely due to the sure hit. So, although Shinra most likely in this fight would probably be stronger and faster, mainly because, his hysterical strength stuff and hand signs, he would probably still be taken down by Jogo's domain expansion. So, yeah. Alright, that's round one. With round two, things obviously are going to be different since generally already went over their abilities and stuff. I'll probably go over either stuff that I didn't before or just mainly go on to the battle between them. So let's start. Also, here's the board just in case you're wondering. So, yeah. The next fight is going to be Benimaru versus Heat Blast, and let's be honest, Benimaru just beats him because, like, although Heat Blast can just absorb like his fire attacks, debatably maybe his like black fire and other fire type attacks, but his other attacks that are not fire based are definitely going to like severely hurt Heat Blast. And I'm also fairly certain that Benimaru also has a heat resistance skill or whatever. So, yeah, the fire isn't going to be that big of a deal as well. So, yeah, this fight goes to Benimaru. Next is Natsu versus Rin Okimura, and based off of just pure stats, just Natsu wins this one. I mean, literally any fire attack Rin can just throw out, Natsu can just eat, and he has multiple transformations that boost his stats. So, yeah, in this type of tournament, just transformations are just way too OP. Even with Rin's regeneration, it's not gonna be able to be bombarded by electric and fire attacks, among other things. So, yeah, Natsu's got this. Next, we got Melaleuona versus Endeavor, and this one is actually kind of interesting, but I'm leaning towards Melaleuona. My main reason for this is, although you could probably argue that Endeavor has like better, like he can increase the temperature of his flames a lot better, but she just has a better variety to kind of just exploit his like speed and would be able to just trap Endeavor a lot better. And since he already has a problem with heat exhaustion with his quirk, him using that a bunch or trying to use it on her on top of getting hit by these flame attacks from her, he's just going to get burnt out and then just taken out. So, yeah, this is actually a good win with Melaleuona, especially with her little power up she has. And the final one for this round is Escanor versus Jogo, and there's really only one way this really goes, and personally I lean towards Escanor because for one, Jogo is going to play with his food. Let's be completely honest. And as the fight goes on, it's going to be more it's going to lean towards Escanor because of the way his powers work, sunshine and all that. By the time Jogo even pulls out something like a maximum meteor or even his domain expansion, Escanor is going to be physically strong enough to either just kind of defend against the maximum meteor or just tank through his domain expansion to just one-shot Jogo. And even though technically domain expansions do give the user a like physical power-up, I don't really know how big of a power-up it is, but it's definitely lower than something like a Black Flash, or at least I think so. So yeah, me personally, I would probably lean towards Escanor, so I'm just going to give Escanor the win. All right, and now we're at the semifinals with these four. I guess we'll see which ones come out on top between these fire manipulators. And the first fight is between Benimaru versus Natsu, and this one really purely depends on how you think this fight would go down. Do you think the power up that Natsu gets with his transformations will give him the win, along with his ability to eat fire, or will Benimaru win because of all of the different abilities that he has? Although between the two, personally, I'm gonna lean towards Benimaru winning this one. I mean, he has stuff like he's able to create barriers to protect himself. He has other attacks that can literally slice through space, and many other like attack type magic, or just skills that don't really involve fire. So he doesn't really need to, use them to hurt him. And he also has like spatial abilities, so he can dodge out of the way, and many more, as well as like many resistances to both resist his electric abilities that he has, as well as the fire abilities. So personally, I don't think the stats would really matter because Benimaru would just outlast Natsu because, well, he's just gonna stop using his fire abilities and stuff like thought acceleration and like stuff on the lines of that. He would just figure out very quickly to just stop using them and then just beat him as quickly as possible. So yeah, personally, I would give this to Benimaru. Alright, the last fight in the semifinals is between Melaleuona and Escanor, and this is definitely a close one for me. On the one hand, Melaleuona has way better just general fire abilities than Escanor, but Escanor, with his ability to just grow over time among like some other abilities he has, I don't know. This might be like extremely close in terms of a fight. Plus, Melaleuona also has a sort of transformation that she has that also makes her stronger as she goes on. But Escanor does have a better version of this, and she would most likely run out of power and die before Escanor does, as he has a general window where he's like fine and still gets stronger until he gets to noon. When he gets to noon and still needs to carry on, he can, use his life force. But at that point, like Melaleuona most likely wouldn't be able to, you know, keep up because her transformation would most likely give out on her, sadly. Plus, she'd be using the transformation late, most likely. So, yeah, I would give this one to Escanor. Alright, we are down to the last two characters, Benimaru and Escanor. Who do you guys think would win? Well, I guess I'll talk about it right now, I guess. So, Benimaru versus Escanor. Who wins between these two? Equal stats, verse equalization, all of the stuff that I said before. And it's very close. This fight would definitely drag out for a good long time, but personally, I do actually have a winner. And I'm going to be honest, I think I'm going to lean with Benimaru on this one. Now, my reasoning for leaning towards him is because, well, he has like many resistances, like fire resistance or just temperature resistance that can help him fighting against, Escanor's fire attacks. He has stuff like, you know, thought acceleration and the barriers that will help him, thought acceleration to kind of figure out what's going on with Escanor, along with the barriers to protect himself against Escanor's attacks. And he has many other resistances, like I think physical resistance and pain resistance. So, he's not gonna that's gonna help him out. And he also has many other attacks than just his fire attacks, and has different special arts that he can use along with his other abilities. And the only things that Escanor has is like those little suns that he can throw at people, or just big ones, but those aren't really going to be that big of a deal. Although he's going to be growing and growing stronger over time, Betty Morrow is not dumb and would figure this out fairly quickly and would definitely not let him like grow over time. He would most likely either one figure out how his ability is making him stronger, uh, whether he figures it out it's like the sunlight or something like that, and just try to find a way to just negate that, which he could be able to do, but most likely what he'll do is just charge up a big old attack or use some type of specific attack and take him out in one fell swoop. I know you guys might disagree with me, especially since this is supposed to have equal stats and all that other thing, but personally, I do think Benny Morrow wins, but it's extremely close, don't get me wrong. And yeah, the winner is Benny Morrow, the winner of this tournament. If you guys like this video, then, well, like it. Um, Put down in the comments what specific themes you want me to do for these tournaments in the future. If you want to see more of these videos, then, subscribe. And, well, the next video is specifically, well, tournament related videos, is going to be centered around hand to hand combat or martial arts. So, if you have any characters that are kind of, throw hands or have kind of martial arts or whatever, then go ahead and tell me in the comments. And please have it be so that they are mainly martial arts based and not, have a bunch of other abilities on top, because that would kind of be a pain. Anyway, I hope you guys loved the video, and yeah, goodbye.